Hello, I'd like to welcome everyone to AmCham Bahrain's webinar today. We are very glad you could join us. Ramadan Kareem to all our friends who observe the holy month of Ramadan. I will make a few announcements before we begin our program. The AmCham team has been busy adapting its programming to be online, and we will host several web events a month to bring you relevant information and opportunities. On May 17th, we will host Doing Business with the U.S. government. And this will include topics will be covered: basics on U.S. government spending each year, types of supplies and services purchased, positioning your business to work for the U.S. government, and where to find competitions and bidding. Other webinar topics that are being developed include AmCham, the U.S. Export-Import Bank's new COVID-19 emergency measures to expand the type of financing AmCham can provide. This will be of interest to any U.S. exporters and international buyers. The date for this will be set in the next few days. If you would like more information on the U.S. economic stimulus programs for businesses in the U.S., please see the COVID-19 resource links on the AmCham website. Now for just a little housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to all registered attendees, as well as posted on AmCham's website. Video and audio have been turned off for attendees, but we invite you to participate in the conversation by submitting your questions in the Q&A box at any time. This is easily done by selecting the Q&A button on the right side of the icon bar on the screen as shown on this slide. Type your question in the compose box and then select send. Finally, we want to thank Finmark Communications for their technical support on today's webinar. I will now hand it over to Kai Zobi, President of the American Chamber of Commerce in Bahrain.
Good afternoon and Ramadan Kareem. Today AmCham is honored to have His Excellency Zayed R Al-Zayani, Minister of Industry, Commerce and Tourism, as our guest to provide us with an updated overview on economic stimulus program, including answering some of our questions. We are also pleased to have more than 200 attendees on this webinar this afternoon. I would like to acknowledge and welcome U.S. Ambassador Justin Siberel and other ambassadors who I understand are attending as well. Under the leadership, guidance and dedication of His Highness the Crown Prince and His excellent Bahrain COVID Response Task Force, Mr. Zayani being a member thereof, the pandemic was managed at its early stages like a Formula One race, saving the lives of many and supporting people and businesses in as much as possible, but definitely ahead of other countries of the world for which Bahrain has been recognized. I would like to introduce His Excellency. His Excellency Mr. Al-Zayani has been the Minister of Industry, Commerce and Trade since 2014. Prior to his appointment, he led his family business as the chairman of Al-Zayani Investments, Euromotors, Zayani Motors, Zayani Leasing, Zayani Properties, Al-Zayani Industries, as well as chairman of the Bahrain International Circuit until 2016. Currently, the Minister is chairman at Gulf Air and chairs Bahrain's Tourism and Exhibitions Authority Board of Directors. He is a board member of the Economic Development Board, Bahrain Mumtalakat Holding Company, Business Family Network, and Minister in charge of Bahrain Bourse since 2016. Mr. Al-Zayani graduated from Boston University, where he received an MBA in finance, and he was former board member of Boston University's International Advisory Group. You're welcome, Mr. Zayani. I would like also to welcome Usman Ahmed, who is going to be hosting our conversation here. Usman has served as head of Citi Group for Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar since 2017, and he is currently the CEO of Citi Bank Bahrain and the global head of Citi's Islamic banking business. He also serves as a board member of the Bahrain International School Association, the Bahrain Institute of Banking and Finance, and Injaz Bahrain. Usman has served on the AmCham board since 2016. I would like to move and hand over the debate to Usman. Thank you.
Thank you, Kes. Good afternoon. Pleasure to have you with us. We always value your time at the AmCham events, and we're especially grateful for you taking the time today, given that we all know how busy you are with the current situation. So really appreciate and look forward to the discussion today. Your Excellency, I hope you can hear me all right.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. I just wanted to perhaps kick off by, first of all, acknowledging and recognizing how Bahrain has been rightly commended by the international community for its swift and prudent and data-driven response to the COVID-19 situation. And amongst the acknowledgements that we heard, we obviously got recognition from the WHO and from the United Nations as well. If you could kindly elaborate on some of the business-driven measures that have been taken by the Kingdom to serve as an economic buffer for the businesses as we face this current crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Usman. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, I'd like to thank AmCham for giving me this opportunity to be with you this afternoon. I'd like to wish everybody Ramadan Kareem. May God bless us all with His kindness in this holy month. And I'd like to thank Qais again for keeping AmCham quite active and busy. I wish Qais dealing with COVID-19 was as much fun and excitement as dealing with an F1 race. Believe me, it's not as much fun or excitement, but it's just as much responsibility. You are absolutely right. I mean, when we ran F1, we had the responsibility of showcasing Bahrain to the world, and we had to carry that burden on our shoulders, make sure everything went smoothly. So we project Bahrain globally as a capable country of hosting such magnificent international events. Today, unfortunately, with COVID-19, we're not the only ones on the scene. The whole world is going through this pandemic. And I think we're quite proud of what has been achieved in Bahrain, Team Bahrain, led by His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince. We have started working on many different lines of thoughts. Of course, the paramount focus and concentration is on medical. That is something we don't compromise with now. The priority remains to protect the health and safety of the citizens and the expatriates living in Bahrain. Having said that, and keeping in mind also that His Royal Highness was quite clear that while we continue performing on the medical side, we don't lose sight of our economic growth and economic prosperity. His Highness has a very clear vision that COVID-19 will last few months, maybe till the end of the year, but the ramifications and the leftovers will be there with us for much longer. And it will be very difficult to shut down our economy and try to restart it. This is why his approach was always balanced from day one, to strike a balance between health and economics, with health having the prevailing argument, of course. This is why you see that Bahrain has not gone for total lockdowns. One of the very few countries that haven't adopted such a scenario. It doesn't mean that we have not discussed it. We have discussed it. It is there. It is an option. But we feel that where we stand today, and because we were able to develop our medical capabilities and capacities earlier on in the game, we were able to have a longer breathing time in terms of keeping a normal life going on. We are also very proud to be one of the very few nations to have its airline up and running, albeit that we fly to only 5 destinations nowadays, and that's based on restrictions from countries and airports in these destinations, because as you all know, many countries have taken the decision to shut down their airports. But we will continue. We are hopeful that some of them will start coming back online, and as and when they do, we are in a position to start ramping up our route network to go back to where we were before COVID-19. Unfortunately, 2020 was a big expansion year for us in Gulf Air. We had a lot of new destinations earmarked to be launched in the summer of 2019, and in fact started announcing and marketing them. Obviously, that all has to be pushed back now, and we have to reassess and go back to the drawing board towards the end of the year to see where we are. But going back to your question, and sorry if I deviated a bit, but I thought it was important to share with you what is the overall mindset that we are following and the overall policy we are following in Bahrain. Just to recap it, His Highness has a very clear vision that to balance health precautions and economic transactions or economic prosperity, health will always be number one, but also we shouldn't lose sight of killing our economy or paralyzing it completely. So with that in mind, there was a bunch of initiatives, stimulative initiatives launched by Bahrain quite early, I would say, when compared to other countries as well. There were mainly 8 initiatives geared or aimed at the private sector. The number one initiative was to ensure that we didn't have massive layoffs, especially in Bahrainis, and this is why the government has stepped in and announced that they will cover Bahraini salaries for 3 months starting from April 2020. I think that gave a lot of confidence to the market, a lot of stability, not just to the businesses, but also to the employees. A lot of these employees were worried about meeting their monthly commitments, taking care of their families, keeping up with their expenses. So I think by doing that, that has taken a doubt out of the picture. Of course, needless to say, the government employees are also protected in their jobs for the time being, and therefore we have managed to cover employment on that end. What's creative about this initiative also, maybe a lot of people don't know, is that it's not funded by the state budget, it's funded by a fund which Hello?
Your Excellency, I think the sound is faded a bit. Yeah, I can hear you now again.
Okay, good. What's special about this fund that it was not taken out of the government budget. It is from a fund that we created a few years ago here to fund unemployment, basically. Those who lose their jobs, they get a certain amount of funding for a few months until they're back in the job market and they're able to find a job. And we're thankful and grateful for the Parliament, who has cooperated with us on passing a law in a record time, in about a week, to allow us to tap into that fund. And the rationale behind it was, while these people are not unemployed, but if we don't intervene now, a lot of them will be. So we tried to preempt the situation and to solve the problem before it even occurred. And I think we have been very successful in doing so. The second initiatives had to do with utilities, and the government has undertaken to pay the cost of electricity and water for the next 3 months, again, starting April 2020. I think that is a great initiative. It has given a lot of coverage to everybody in Bahrain, expatriates, locals, businesses, industries, all of them benefited out of that. And again, it gave them another breathing space. The same applied again for municipal taxes or fees. So that's been postponed for 3 months. And we, as the Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Tourism, decided to suspend the lease rents of 3 months on industrial land, and as well as the 5% tourism levy, which we collect from the tourist establishments like hotels and restaurants. What's important also is that prior to being involved with COVID, the government launched in the last quarter of last year 100 million dinar liquidity fund to support businesses in trouble, and mainly the SME sector. That has been doubled now to 200 million, with the additional 100 million focused more so on the SME sector. We feel that that is a sector that's been growing over the last few years. We're happy to see them becoming more job creators than job seekers, and therefore we wanted to support them more as a government to keep them up and running. It's also a sector which is predominantly in its infancy stage, so it's quite vulnerable to any hits in the economy or any unforeseen circumstances like we live in today. Plus, this sector doesn't require, on an individual or on an establishment basis, doesn't require the amount of funding per company or per CR that is required for bigger companies, but when you add it all up, it does take a lot of money, and I think we did the right choice by focusing more on the SME sector to keep them supported during this hardship. The CBB has relaxed a lot of its guidelines on the banks. Usman, you probably know better in this than me. That has resulted in 3.7 billion, about $10 billion of possible liquidity that could be extended to the market, which mainly facilitated for the banks to reschedule payments of loans and financial commitments on the business sector and the industrial sector further down the road. And the banks have been very cooperative in this, and we thank them for being socially responsible and a valid member of our business community. Lastly, Tamkeen. Tamkeen has been given a mandate to redirect most of its programs to companies and to support them because of COVID-related issues. And Tamkeen has put up new schemes in place, already up and running. I think all in all, this has been, I mean, when you look at it at 11 billion or 4 billion BD or $11 billion, $11.5 billion, in a number, it may not match up to other bigger countries, but when you compare it to our GDP, it's about 35% of our GDP, and I think that is where the value of this package stands out.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Indeed, I think as a percentage of GDP, I would say that this is perhaps one of the highest in the world in terms of the level of stimulus that was provided by the government at a fairly early stage. And I think the other couple of things I would add is that, Bahrain has differentiated itself in a way that it has not been, just sort of having different approaches on travel restrictions between expat residents and citizens, and also some of the measures that you mentioned around, having the support on utilities and support for all businesses, whether private sector, Bahraini or foreign businesses, on salaries for Bahraini citizens. That's again something that is very business friendly in the approach that has been implemented. And as you mentioned, Your Excellency, some of these ramifications are going to go far beyond the 3 months that the measures have been implemented for, and possibly even beyond the end of the year. Are you already starting to think about how businesses, and particularly distressed businesses or certain sectors that have been hit particularly hard, may require support beyond the initial 3-month period? And if so, what that could be?
The peculiarity with this situation is nobody knows how long COVID-19 is going to last. So it's very difficult to plan against a scenario which is quite open-ended. It could be a month, it could be 3, it could be 6, it could be a year, maybe 2. The main focus for us now is not to come to a standstill. Everybody's going to have, some scars beyond COVID. But we should work together as a community, as one team, and to minimize the pain of COVID. It's unrealistic to think that everybody will or someone will not be hurt in some way or form. So we have to look at how do we rebound as soon as possible. And this is one of the reasons, the main reasons why His Highness policy was not to shut down the economy, because if you start from zero, it's much difficult from starting from 20 or 30%. Obviously, there are some sectors that have been hit the hardest. 2 of them are under my portfolio, tourism and aviation. Will they rebound? Yes. When? How soon? Nobody knows, because they have effects of other countries. If, for example, today we decide to open tourism in Bahrain, but the airports or the causeway are still shut down, where are we going to get tourists from? So it's not just a decision that is taken here at in Bahrain. It involves other countries as well. Aviation, I think, will take a long time to come back. People will not start traveling. A lot of business travel, I think, will end up being substituted with meetings like we're having today. I think Team and Zoom have taken off, and people has become almost the preferred choice, from the forced choice to the preferred choice. And I think we will see more of this in the future. I personally have had already 2 meetings with the GCC Ministers of Commerce in the last month. We never met before, twice in a month. But now with this being available, so it's quite easy and efficient to do. Will there be more measures taken in the future? I think we have to assess as we go on. I can't give you an answer today because I don't know how long this scenario will last. If it starts getting better by June, July, then we could look for better days and resumption of normal business. If it continues or, God forbid, gets worse, then we'll have to reassess. And this is what we've been doing. I just want you to know that the first meeting we had about COVID in Bahrain was in January. It wasn't before, it wasn't after we got a case or after it started spreading as we see it today around the world. So the preparation started well ahead. I clearly remember the first time His Highness asked me to do something related to COVID was on the 23rd of January. We discussed it at Cabinet. We discussed it, His Highness discussed it with Parliament. And His Highness set up the team back in January. And that team started working quietly behind the scenes, not to create a panic, not to create any false impressions. But initially, the aim was to create enough medical capacity so our medical system doesn't collapse, which we have succeeded in doing, and to make sure that we have enough food stock in Bahrain, that in case something happens on the logistics or the supply of food, we don't run out of food. We have managed to do that quite early in the game, and I think that allowed us to be more flexible. The idea of going on 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off is to, that's basically has some relevance to the incubation period of this virus. And I think we've shut down for 2 weeks, we opened for 2 weeks, we've shut down again. Now we're in the second phase or the second part of the 2 weeks. And we're very amazed at the level of cooperation and discipline we've seen from the businesses, from the residents in Bahrain, from the nationals. People are quite well aware and quite socially responsible in their behavior, and that makes our job a lot easier when managing it at government, that we don't have to go to the next level of drastic measures where we enforce lockdowns and more severe measures. So we'll have to assess. We meet twice a week to talk about COVID. So when we talk on Tuesday, the conversation sometimes changes on the following Thursday. Usually we meet on Tuesday and Thursday because something else developed. But we take decisions quickly, and we take decisions on the ground based on what's happening in the real world.
Indeed, I think the approach that the government has taken has inspired that confidence in the public to not engage in things like panic buying, for example, like we've seen in some other countries. And you mentioned about, the need to ensure food security and, secure supply chains fairly early in the process. Do you see that as a growing challenge, Your Excellency, in the context of how other countries are locked down currently? Or is Bahrain able to manage critical supplies, food, health, and manufacturing?
No, I don't see it as a challenge. We got on with it. We did it. We're quite confident that there is enough supplies, and the supplies are still coming in the pipeline. It's not just looking at now, looking in the future as well. I have to say that countries have been cooperative in terms of shipments of food and medical supplies. Much more open and easier than transfer of passengers or transfer of general goods. Of course, there is a huge demand. Demand globally has gone up for food and for medical supplies. But again, because we had a lead start and we started early in February procuring all these requirements, we're quite in a comfortable position where we are today.
Could you share the government's current thinking about the process of how different sectors could get back to working on site? I won't say getting back to work because a lot of people are working from home, but just getting back on site to offices and opening of schools. I understand what you said about the timeline being constantly reevaluated. But just in terms of the process of how the implementation will take place when we're ready to go back.
If you see the 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off approach we've taken so far, we have, even within the 2 weeks shutdown, we have allowed certain sectors to carry on. What's important for us, and the reason we do this, is to minimize human interaction in closed spaces. So we want people to follow the health guidelines, social distancing, masks, washing your hands, disinfecting, all that. And we want them to be spaced out. By the same token, we also want businesses to continue operating in some way or form. So we have excluded about 11 sectors from being totally shut down, and we have put guidelines for them to operate. In the first 2 weeks closure, there were actually 10. We added one, telecoms, in the second shutdown, which started last Thursday. Again, by the time we finish this, will be 2 weeks from now, or just less than 2 weeks. We will reassess the situation. We will see the number of cases we have in Bahrain, the speed of the virus spread, and then we'll be able to relax or maybe even harden, if need be, the restrictions. It's very important to take into account the month of Ramadan. Ramadan is a very social month in Bahrain. There's a lot of interaction within families and beyond families. So you have the mosques, the prayers, you have the majlises, the iftar, ghabga, all that. And there you have tens and hundreds of people, even maybe thousands of people in some praying sites. It's important that we contain it in this critical period. And I think the focus and the intention is to do that during Ramadan, to stay in smaller groups to stay as distant as possible, but communicate with video or social media or chat and reduce less. I think there's been a lot of observance to that, and that will help us in a great way to combat the disease spread. The problem with corona is that it spreads very fast, and it spreads from people who don't show any symptoms or any signs, so you don't know who is the guy with you or next to you, whether he or she are carrying the virus or not, because they may not know even themselves. A lot of the cases we have reported in Bahrain, the vast majority of them show absolutely no symptoms. So they don't have any fever, they don't have any body ache, no coughing, and they look perfectly healthy and perfectly normal. That's the challenge we have to deal with, is that you're fighting something that you cannot see.
Indeed. And Your Excellency, in this region, of course, in addition to the impact of COVID-19, there's also been the impact of unprecedented and sudden decline in oil prices. And has, of course, reacted again very early to that new reality and reported that the government will be reducing expenses at all ministries by 30%. Could you share your thinking around how easy or difficult that would be to implement, and what sort of impact it might have on projects in the future for Bahrain?
I think the projects will slow down, no doubt, because we have to set our priorities differently. And with a dropping oil price, it kind of adds to the complexity of the problem. Prior to that, we were doing quite well in terms of the financial module we have launched last year with the GCC countries supporting us, Kuwait, Saudi, and UAE. From a banking perspective, and you're a banker, you would know the level of liquidity in the market is at maybe at its highest. So our banks and our financial institutions are solid. I look at it from two different angles. I think people are spending less, so there's more money being saved, and maybe more money being spent less on meaningless items. So there'll be money around once we get beyond this, and people will start getting back into their normal habits. The bigger picture is that we're not in this alone. The whole world is going this. So when you have a class and the whole class gets a C grade, you just curve up and everybody goes to an A. So we're not in this alone. I think the whole world will have to take sacrifices. It is not peculiar to a certain country or a sector or a region. It's not led by a certain commodity, but everybody's going to have to chip in, and everybody's going to have to average out at the end of the day. We'll have to reset, no doubt about that, and start rebuilding. But I think what COVID has introduced to the world is a bit more compassion, and people are more tolerant and more understanding of one another, because everybody sees the same fate and the same problem. Maybe in the past, when the problem was regional, they didn't feel the pain, they didn't relate to it. But now, nobody can isolate themselves from COVID and what it's brought to this world. And I think everybody's more understanding, the businesses, the communities, the banks. So we'll have to work together, be more patient, more tolerant, and find a way to slowly but surely grow back again.
Indeed. And I think one of the areas where there's been a lot of passion evoked is the appreciation of the healthcare workers. And, they have been really at the forefront of fighting this on behalf of humanity, including in Bahrain. Just looking at the sort of silver lining in any sort of dark situation, do you see an opportunity for further improvement and investment in the healthcare sector, certain key learnings perhaps coming out of this experience, where there could be greater support for investment in the healthcare sector in Bahrain?
I think what we've seen from this pandemic is that some countries, industrial countries, seriously need to look at their healthcare system. And they have to do it fast, because the amounts of deaths we've seen in some of these countries is shocking. While people, maybe this is a wake-up call to humanity, is that, try to preserve human life by better medical facilities, by better preparation, make that more of a priority than, spending money on, I don't know, military or something else. At the end of the day, you can't have an economy without people, and you can't have any community without healthy citizens and members of that community. So health is now definitely back on the top of the list of priorities. Food security is another. People started thinking about food security much greater. Environment is there. People talk about how the world's gotten cleaner because the factories have shut down and the oceans are better, and you see dolphins in Venice and I don't know what. We see dolphins in Bahrain all the time, by the way. I don't know what's the big deal about a dolphin in Venice. But this is, the priorities have changed. It is a wake-up call, no doubt about it. Family values, I think, will change drastically. There's much more connectivity between family members. People are starting to go back to their roots and their families, and kids with their parents, brothers, siblings. That is definitely going to change.
Indeed. And Bahrain has had a focus on e-commerce and the fintech sector for some time now, but this might also result in a new boost once the dust settles to e-commerce and e-learning, as well as remote working, like we're discussing. Perhaps too early to talk about some of those things, but do you think there could be further sort of advantages coming out of this for the focus that Bahrain has had on the fintech sector?
Yeah, I mean, since I took over this position, I've always promoted e-commerce, and I've always, especially when I had my meetings with the BCCI, I've always encouraged them to think beyond the souk in Manama and to think beyond even Bahrain. I've always said that take advantage of the very simple fact that we have an FTA with the United States. It's a huge market. They're receptive of new ideas and new products from different parts of the world, but we haven't really done much about it. I think this is an opportunity. We launched a website on Thursday. We built it in-house in the ministry. We called it mall.bh. And we put basically all the e-commerce platforms of Bahrain on it. We started with 100 and we're building it up. And we've opened up for free to join, and we've opened it up for other companies who don't have an e-commerce platform to come, and we'll help them to set it up. Even when we shut down the retail sector in the first 2 weeks and in this 2 weeks, we've allowed them to sell e-commerce, we've allowed them to sell over the phone, allowed them to sell on a direct delivery basis. The whole idea is that we don't want customers inflow to come into their showrooms or into their businesses. I asked this morning how well did the launch of the site go, and I was informed that we had more than 17,000 applicants. Now we're worried that the site might crash because it wasn't built for such big capacity. Now, it's good that we have that. The bad thing that it took Corona to bring it, because in 5 years we didn't have an interest from 17,000 applicants to start e-commerce. In 2 days since launching it, there they are. But at least we got it up and running, and now there is an opportunity to build on it even further.
Thank you. Your Excellency, before I take questions from the audience, just one last question. How do you think the private sector can help in the efforts of the government here and to help mitigate some of the negative impacts? What message do you have for the private sector?
The message I have is that this is a time where somebody shows their patriotism. It's not a time where somebody tries to make an extra buck. It's not the time where you try to take advantage of the market. And we in the ministry are watching very carefully, and we will not be lenient at all with anybody who tries to take advantage, especially in food and medical supplies. I think we've seen good gestures from the private sector over the last week, 10 days with their kind donations. I think they've been responsible in terms of observing the operating rules, who shuts down, when they shut down, all that. They have been very flexible with their staff, working from home, working at 50% or even more from home. They've shown good responsibility. I think they've developed a nice sense of, a nice spirit of cooperation amongst themselves, so they're working with each other to help each other, whether it is a big company supporting a smaller company or companies who do business together, how they can work their businesses together to help each other. All in all, I mean, one of the things that made our job easier as government officials, and especially involved in managing the COVID situation, is the immense support we received from the community in Bahrain, both business and private, both Bahrainis and expatriates. We were very blessed that we had a visionary leader with His Royal Highness who saw this coming quite early, and he put in contingency plans well in advance. And we're equally blessed to see that people who are on the other side, the receiving end of this strategy, are very cooperative and very committed. We've opened up a volunteering site, and we've received more than 35,000 volunteers in there. I get calls, believe it or not, from people complaining that they volunteered and they haven't been called yet to do anything. And we say, well, that's good in a way that we don't have to call you. That means we're handling it. We're not at our limits, but we appreciate your eagerness and your commitment. Hopefully, in the next couple of months, a couple of weeks, maybe a month, we will start maybe seeing positive signs that the worst is behind us. This, of course, I don't want to spread any false optimism. This all depends that we don't have another cycle of or surge in spreading like we had over the last 2 weeks with the labor camps. So we have to stay focused. We have to stay committed. Observe the health instructions. Don't take things for granted. Something very small could help in a very big way, and equally something very small neglected could have a very negative impact on us as a community. So we're in a very good shape. As government officials, we are really proud of what Bahrain has done as a team. We're really proud of the achievements, and we're really grateful and thankful for the leader of His Highness the Crown Prince.
Thank you. If it's okay with you, I'll move to some questions we're getting from
Sure.
the audience. The first one I have here is whether VAT payments could be postponed till the impact of COVID-19 situation is over.
VAT payments.
Can you repeat that, please?
Yes. The question is, will VAT payments be postponed until coronavirus restrictions are lifted?
Is VAT another virus? No, I mean, I don't see the relevance of that. VAT is a result of your sales, and if you're not selling, you don't pay VAT. And if you're selling and your banks are rescheduling your cash flows, then you should be able in a position to meet that. We will look at case-by-case basis. This is why we have the liquidity fund, and this is where people can apply if they have unusual circumstances that stops them from paying. This is why, for example, we gave the hotel sector 3 months levy. We took it out because we knew that they'll be operating at pretty much zero or very negligible amounts. But for the time being, there's nothing being discussed about VAT. I'm not the right person to speak about VAT anyways, so I'll pass on that.
Thank you. Some of the questions have already been covered in our earlier discussion, so I'm skipping those. And with your permission, I'm also skipping the many compliments I'm receiving on this from people on the screen. But just to go through some of the other questions that we have here, is there a plan to retain some of the good changes that have taken place during this crisis? Work from home, remote working, responsible care for the underprivileged, better primary services like good sanitation, etc.
Well, I think we all have a responsibility to learn from this crisis. We all lived it. It's not something you've been told about. You've experienced it. So have I. And I think there are lessons that we learned. Personally, I think the most thing I've learned from this crisis is to appreciate family. We tend to take our family for granted. Closer family, especially, spouses, kids. We focus more, maybe. I speak about myself, maybe it applies to you as a successful career man. We spend maybe more time working on our careers and our businesses, and we subconsciously neglect spending time with our kids and family. There were many times where I've missed my kids' birthdays or events or schools, or because I was in a meeting or I was traveling. I've been with them now for almost 3 months every day, and it's something joyful really to see more of your family and to spend time together. Alhamdulillah, all are healthy, everybody's well. That I think is something we should cherish, and maybe in the future when things go back to normal, we should make it a priority to make time to spend with our family and our loved ones. Community is another. We've seen how people started being tolerant of one another, how people being respectful of one another. What I am happy about is that when people were diagnosed with the virus, they were not outcasted from society. It wasn't like a crime. There was more compassion towards them, there was more support towards them, and that made community even stronger. These are the lessons I would learn. The biggest lesson is not to take life for granted. Anything can change any minute from something totally unseen. If any of us was told that this is going to happen back in October, you would have said, this person is crazy. Nobody in this world imagined the world to come to a standstill, the whole world to be suffering like that. Personally, I tell you, beginning of the year, we were talking about receiving aircrafts and launching routes and going there and all that. And can we accelerate the rate? Can we get the aircrafts earlier? Can we fly to more destinations earlier? And now it's all off the table because the airports are closed. Have you ever imagined a day where the aviation industry would come to a standstill? I don't think any of us did. So life is simple, I think, and we are now enjoying the simplicity of life. We will, unfortunately, a lot of us will forget about this in 6 months' time or a year when things go back to normal, and we may go back to our bad habits. I don't know. I hope not. I will try to cherish what I've learned in this Corona time. But let's see what happens.
Your Excellency, I have a question here about the expected changes in industrial activity or new opportunities in Bahrain in the future. Some economic analysts have suggested that COVID-19 disruptions will cause changes to global supply chains, for instance, with more onshoring of manufacturing and or diversifying supplies away from over-reliance on certain countries. Does the minister see changes or opportunities for Bahrain's manufacturing sector emerging out of the COVID-19 situation?
We're talking about this on a GCC level. In the two meetings we've had last Thursday and the Thursday before, we talked extensively about building a GCC network. Because, you know, Bahrain, take Bahrain for example, it's a very small country. You can't possibly secure everything in Bahrain. We don't have the land, we don't have the resources, we don't have the manpower. But we can work with bigger countries in the GCC to secure food supply, medical supplies, stuff like that. So there's more cooperation going on between the GCC as a whole to develop more integration with our economies so we can trade with each other more than rely on further countries abroad.
Thank you. And perhaps one last question. I'm just conscious of time. We have to one thing. Small businesses need liquidity loans from banks, but expat investors do not get loan approvals if they don't have Bahraini partners as guarantors. How can this be addressed in this particular time?
They don't get loan approvals from who?
It's referring to banks not being comfortable in giving loans to expat businesses without having local sponsors.
Why? Maybe that's something you should discuss with your colleagues. As far as we're concerned, we gave them a CR in Bahrain. So as a government, we recognize them as operating in Bahrain legitimately. I think what you should look at is beyond nationality or race. You should look at the business model and extend financial lending to it based on its merit rather than based on who owns it. But we have not distinguished, anything when we said, when we expected the banks to reschedule the financial loans and commitments, we haven't distinguished anything between Bahraini and non-Bahraini.
And certain banks have also, in fact, extended the forbearance measures that have been put in place voluntarily to cover non-Bahrainis as well. Because, as you said, this is a global situation. It's impacting everyone, irrespective of.
You also have to keep in mind, you have to manage this very carefully, not to create a domino effect. So you lean on somebody, that somebody will lean on someone else, and eventually the chain breaks somewhere. So everybody has to be reasonable, patient, and we have to, just ride it out. It's, in a way, it's a lot similar to, you hear this theory about flattening the curve and all that, so your medical capacity doesn't collapse. It's the same way. We have to flatten the curve economically, so our financial sector doesn't collapse or our business community doesn't collapse. You just have to give it more of time to sort itself out and spread it out into the future.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
To hear your views, and we really appreciate it once again. On behalf of the entire AmCham community, thank you.
Thank you. I hope that you've learned something from me. There's a lot happening. 1 hour, unfortunately, is not enough to talk about this. I tried to sum it up as best as I can, but I'm always happy to be back with you in AmCham, and my regards and thanks to everyone who's made this possible today. And one last message, please stay safe, stay healthy, and Ramadan Kareem. A very, very advanced Eid Mubarak.
Thank you so much. Eid Mubarak to you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. We really appreciate your time, your wisdom in leading us through this. And we thank our AmCham community for joining us today, and look forward to having you back for future webinars. The recording of this will be sent to all registered attendees, and it will also be on our website. And Ramadan Kareem again.
Thank you.